Hey, welcome to Lead Wisely by WonderTour. As usual, we're going to start with a tough question about leadership. Today, we're looking at the Marvel movie Iron Man from 2010. And Drew, what I want to ask you is what does this movie have to say about, in this age of technology, in this age of AI and all of those fun discussions, the balance or the choices between using technology to augment humans on the one hand and using it to replace humans on the other hand? What do we see in this movie about those kinds of discussions, which are, I think, relatively current here in late 2024?
Oh, that's so great. There's so many examples in this movie of how we augment humans with technology, from the prototype in the terrorist cave all the way to the end, where we have the kind of Mach 2, I think it is, Iron Man suit versus Obi's, like, I'm sure there's a technical name for it in the Marvel
The
canon, but
Ironmonger suit, yeah.
there you go, the Ironmonger suit. Thank you. He has this very different approach for how to use the exact same technology. I think that's where I'd like to start, is just contrasting how those two operate. Tony goes through these iterations of how to make this suit better, right? So we have this moment where Tony's experimenting with the repulsors, the energy cannons out of his hand, and he's using them to create flight. And he realizes that they're useful for more than just creating flight. And it ends up kind of being his central weapon slash support function that he has. He uses it over the course of all the movies in so many different ways. And it becomes the kind of the defining feature of Iron Man outside of the color and the shape and stuff of the suit. Where on the other side, we have Obi, who tries to create this hulking suit that makes him the most powerful, that will allow him to control, that will allow him to be able to overwhelm Tony, to be able to beat through his armor and, kind of overcome him with sheer power and force.
Hmm.
And his approach to how he creates lift and how he manages that suit ends up being his downfall. That his augmentation is all about being able to head on fight Tony. It provides him less flexibility. And in the end, what's the question that we're considering here? It's, how should we augment humans? When should we augment versus replace humans with bots and AI? And it all comes down to the exact same thing, but the suit is super emblematic of it. And it's that it's about the human who's interfacing with the technology. It always starts with the human. It's not about creating the best suit ever. We see Obi in the lab yelling at the research scientists, like, Tony created this in a month in a cave in Afghanistan or whatever. Are you kidding me? I'm giving you the technology and you're not able to make this work.
Yeah.
It's brute forcing the solution versus looking at the human and quickly iterating and testing and saying, does this create value? And then being ruthless with it. If this does not create value, if it's not good for the human, if it's not allowing the Iron Man suit to be able to serve people, to save people, to accomplish the mission, it's getting cut.
Right. Yeah, no, I love the both the visual and sort of thematic elements of it, right? When Tony starts, like he's showing off his Jericho missile system, and it's like he stands on the ridge and he presses a button and a bunch of stuff blows up. Like he has zero engagement, zero risk. He's putting zero personal energy into it other than, designing the things, right? And there's no humans involved at all. The missile just goes off and does a thing. Right, and the Iron Man suit is very different in that. Partly because because he's in the suit and it's not doing the job for him. It's just helping him be better at what he's trying to do. Right, he's more powerful, he's stronger, he's less vulnerable. Right, but he's not invulnerable because he's right there in the suit. So the whole scene where the Raptors are chasing him around in the sky, like the fighter jets are chasing him around and they're shooting at him, and he's like, "No, this is me. It's me. I'm in the suit." Like the fact that he cannot use this technology without being personally engaged, right, puts some obligation on him of what to do with it, both both morally, but also just sort of from a vulnerability viewpoint. Like he has to own the results of what he's doing because he is actually doing it amplified by technology. And I think that's a lot of like when we talk about using technology in our modern world, right? If you talk about using a chatbot to write something or draw you an image or, do a movie or whatever, there are things that technology is definitely better at than we are right now. It can move much faster in certain directions. It can, you can take a giant pile of text and turn it into a summary really well. But we're, today, as we speak this, we're not yet at the point where it can construct something large and complicated and intentional as well as a human. But even if it could, if you could press a button and write 300 novels and have those novels be amazing and post them to Amazon or whatever, you would be at one remove from that. You wouldn't be taking ownership of as an author. You wouldn't be making decisions as an author. You wouldn't be, or as an artist drawing images, or as a movie director, putting scenes and writing script for the actors. Like, if there's not a human making those decisions, then you don't have any, you're not taking any responsibility for the quality, for the content, for the values that are expressed. The weapons are an easy example of that to think about, as like the weapon that you press a button and something bad happens to somebody miles away has a different level of, uh, you're taking responsibility, a different level of moral obligation than a weapon where you're holding it or where you are the weapon.
Yeah, I think the concept of ownership is super important to leadership. And definitely when you are unleashing technology that has the power to augment, that has the power to expand like you said, the strength, the influence, the attention grabbing, whatever it is that the technology has the ability to do, it, like we've talked about throughout this entire series on technology, technology has the ability to create freedom for us, or it has the ability to enslave us. And the question is less about the technology and more about the purpose and the way that we execute on the technology.
And so I think we see that kind of as Tony starts to figure out, as we talked about in the last episode, sort of his character arc is trying to actually develop a purpose for his life. And then once he realizes that he gets to form opinions about the purpose, then he's trying to figure out how to first clean up his messes and then maybe be more out in front of it and be more, shifting the world in a direction that he thinks is, that he actually had decided on, rather than I'm going to make these tools and somebody else gets to make all the decisions, right? So we see him taking responsibility in the course of the movie, but that responsibility comes with the risk. It comes with the vulnerability, right? And so that's a very different dynamic for the people around him too. Like, not only is he taking more responsibility and where things are going, like, oh, I'm going to go clean up this mess myself. I'm going to come back with bullet holes in my suit and I'm going to patch it back up and I'm going to put it back on and I'm going to go out and do it again.
So yeah, Brian, I think that's a good transition into the intro here, because Tony's ownership changes. It's this moment where he realizes that he can't just be this armchair quarterback that sits back and creates all this technology but doesn't understand how it's actually impacting the world. He gets there on the front lines, he sees it, he experiences how it impacts the people that he's trying to help, and it forces a change in him. So let's hit the intro.
I'm Brian Nutwell.
And I'm Drew Paroz.
And we are on a journey to become better leaders by touring fantastic worlds and inspiring lore by going on a WonderTour.
We connect leadership concepts to story context because it sticks to our brains better. You can find out more at WonderTourPodcast.com.
Nice. So, Tony Stark, Iron Man, augmenting himself with technology. Let's get to the mountaintop of this episode. As he's augmenting himself with technology, we have this moment where he is fought his way out of the cave in one suit, had kind of a terrible experience, but changed his mindset, realized that there were some problems in the world that he had created, goes out in the suit again, goes out in the new suit to go clean up some messes, comes back with a bunch of bullet holes in the suit, and he's getting ready to go out and do it again. And he has this confrontation with his loyal sidekick and enabler, Pepper Potts. So take us into this, Drew. What happens in this scene, and what do you like about this?
Yeah, so this scene happens when Tony is about to put the suit back on and go back out after, like you mentioned earlier, he keeps coming back with bullet holes in him and everything's scuffed up and the technology doesn't quite work exactly as he intended, or Tony's not capable of wielding it quite properly yet. He just keeps putting himself in the face of more and more harm, which in a way that is kind of consistent with his character. He is super confident and he believes that he can solve any problem and that he can just be the face and be out there. So we can easily empathize with Pepper Potts when she tries to have this confrontation with Tony, she says, Tony, if you put back on the suit, I'm going to quit. And it's interesting because both Potts and Tony share their character here. While Potts's character is static in this moment, she's continuing to be loyal. She's continuing to be, wise and challenge Tony, even when it's hard for people to challenge Tony because of the type of uh, way that he responds. And then you get Tony, who's a dynamic character, and he starts to change here because he's not abrasive. Instead, he's empathetic, understanding of why she comes in that perspective. And also, he says, I can never not put on the suit now because he's been irreversibly changed. As we talked about in episode 1, his experience with Yinsen, his experience seeing firsthand the impact of the technology that he creates, it changed him. It made him see that he has to do something different. This is the beginning of Tony's redemption arc. This is him going from the playboy engineer who, can do anything, can be as confident, can be the face that people respect, to being somebody who's a hero and eventually a leader that people can look up to and follow. So, Brian, I saw this quote and I can't find the source of it. So, unfortunately, even when it was quoted, I couldn't find the source of it. But successful people are respected, but redeemed people are admired. And I think
Mm.
that is the transition of Tony's story arc across from this first movie in Iron Man all the way through to Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, and this scene is, like you say, he goes from only caring about himself to at least caring about cleaning up his own messes to like, oh, maybe that job's not done, right? Maybe just because I stopped making the world worse isn't sufficient, right? Maybe I should actually start making the world better. And what's interesting about the way Pepper's reaction is portrayed in this, right, is that she has been a loyal friend and a loving, supporting person in his life, enabling him for as far as we can tell forever, right? Even when he was creating weapons of mass destruction, like even when he was like without a thought abusing everybody around him and creating all this stuff, like she's just her purpose is much narrower in this context. Like she's just there to make sure that he's relatively healthy and able to do the things that he wants to do, and she's sort of trusting him to make good decisions, even when he obviously isn't. But the reason she's upset at this point is not because she objects to violence, right? She's been supporting a arms dealer for her entire career, right? Like it's not because she doesn't think fighting is a good thing or she wants to discourage violence or whatever. It's just because of the risk to him that this new thing in his life is that he's taken on responsibility, but he's also putting himself in harm's way in the service of doing these things. And what she says, like, yeah, you're all I have too. You're the only person that I actually care about. So the reason I'm upset is because I don't want to lose you. So she really her focus and purpose is visionary and nurturing and compassionate, but very focused on him. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the thing that he violates in his relationship with her, is that he's putting himself sort of casually at risk. And she is willing to trust him enough to go put herself at risk. Right. The next thing that happens is she goes and has to go face Obi in the office and potentially get herself in trouble to help him solve his problems and to help Tony sort of on his redemption arc. So she has to buy into not only allowing him to do these things or supporting him to do these things, but actually putting herself at risk at the same time. So it's another one of those virtue is a strong word for it, but that values and that approach propagates through the people around you.
Yeah, the conflict is required. That's why I liked this scene as our mountaintop moment, even though, as a lot of times on WonderTour, we might choose some mountaintop moments that are spectacular and like the pinnacle of cinema, and other ones are just going to be these like off dialogues between the characters where we see the change start to show before we get the change in full force, when Tony sacrifices himself kind of at the end of this movie to try to get rid of Obi.
Yeah, yeah, and that he, again, at the end, in the press conference at the end, that he takes responsibility. Like, no, I am actually going to be a hero. I'm going to commit to being a hero in the public eye, which means I can't get out of it. I can't decide to stop. Right. So that's a very different, I am Iron Man requires, like we said earlier, stopping being the former version of Tony Stark at some point.
It does, and this moment we like to again. It seems like on Wonder Tour sometimes we keep rehashing the same things over and over from slightly different perspectives, and I think that's kind of the point. It's not all the same things, right? But the
Right.
more we can shape our models, our mindsets around these things, the more we can go and take in micro learnings and go practice them, the more we can become that magnanimous character slowly but surely. And so this moment, this conflict, it gives way to this realization. And Tony doesn't have this realization necessarily in this movie. He starts to, but this is the realization that he will have over the course of this entire Marvel Cinematic Universe phases 1 through 3 arc. And it's one of our Wonder Tour principles that he goes from this original viewpoint of true power is having the biggest weapon, which is a paraphrase of the Howard Stark quote, to the Wonder Tour principle of true power is in sacrifice.
Right. True power is in influencing other people through your example so you can force multiply that way. Right. That's, yeah, absolutely. And it's a very different kind of hero arc, right? Like the Luke Skywalker, the young, fresh-faced farm boy who wants to have an adventure and just has to learn skills and has to learn philosophy and has to learn how to become a leader is one kind of hero arc. But this is something I think, the reason these stories are powerful for us is we can see ourselves in them, right? I think a lot of us can potentially see ourselves like in the middle of your life, like I've accomplished some things. I've been successful. I feel like I'm good at something. I feel like I've got some momentum built up here, right? Like I've sort of figured out who I want to be. Remembering to keep examining that, remembering to like, okay, what purpose was I after in the first place, and am I still aligned to that, or am I having the impact that I thought, or what am I doing with the people around me, like that. Remembering to examine that even in midlife, and you may need to make some course corrections. You may need to flower into a different version of yourself. Is when you're feeling your best, when you're feeling your most confident and your most cocky and your most hyper competent and all that, like, hey, okay, am I being Tony Stark right now? Like, am I is that because I am actually just like hitting on all cylinders, or is it because I've made it all about me and so it feels good in the moment? And I think that's a good, thinking about the Tony Stark archetype is a good way to sort of reality check that. That's a different flavor of having to reset on the hero's journey, or a flavor of having to reset your own leadership role.
Yeah, and that's why on Wonder Tour we talk about we in order to be able to learn, sometimes we need to make mountains out of molehills in terms of stories. We need to like draw it up to a higher level, because in your everyday life, the decisions that you make, sometimes it's a little more mundane, and these micro decisions, it's like it's hard to tell that you're having to choose between wisdom and folly every single time, when in reality that is effectively what's happening. Most of us don't have too many of these huge Tony Stark moments, but we do have a lot of everyday moments. And being able to see things in this blown up version in these superhero movies or whatever helps us to be prepared for those everyday decisions.
Yeah, I like that, and that's I think that helps us put a pin in what we talked about in the previous episode with Iron Man about this sort of leadership role and what the reflections that you have to do. Bringing it back to the technology piece, right? This idea of the person in the suit, right? The technology is makes you Iron Man. The technology makes you it can make you fly, it can make you stronger, it can make you less vulnerable, but it's still you. Like the leader assisted by technology, the engineer assisted by technology should still be taking ownership of their actions, be designing technology so that humans can decide on their purposes and enact it more powerfully in the world, not that you should absolve yourself of responsibility and go press a button and whatever decision the machine makes is the correct credit rating for that person or the correct person to let into the building or the correct hiring decision. Absolving yourself of responsibility is maybe not what we would suggest as the magnanimous leader is not the correct use of technology. And so the suit analogy is really good. Like I'm still in there. I'm still making decisions. I'm still deciding on the actions.
That's good, Brian. I think that takes us into our practical application segment for the day. So, in terms of our practical application, let's just bring it back. Let's tie it together with technology, kind of everything we've talked about with Iron Man here. We can pull in this quote that Tony has that I vaguely referenced earlier. My old man had a philosophy: peace means having bigger weapons than the other guys. And can't we look at that today and just replace weapon with AI? Or if you requote it, my old man had a philosophy: winning at business means having a bigger AI than the other guys. What does that mean today? Because it does feel like there is a race to the bottom of AI that we've talked about before, Brian, that's just like, I just got to apply it just because I got to apply it, because if I don't, I'm getting behind.
Yeah. We see this all over business right now. People want to do AI things because they think everybody else is doing AI things, and they're going to get less competitive at the every company level. And then in the specific giant tech companies, they're like, oh, we have to build the bigger AI, the faster AI, the more whatever capable language model or image generator or decision tool or something, because everybody else is going to get there first, and then we're going to lose, right? And we're pouring infinite resources into these things, like literally, like we have to build new hydroelectric dams to power the inference engines that we want to run. Like this is it's a ridiculous bottomless well of hand wavy future benefits versus like incredible current expenses, right? And incredible current distraction. And we've done some amazing things with technology in the last 40 years, and so we certainly shouldn't stop. But the sanity check on the purpose is still a little thin, right? There's a lot of companies that are like, oh, we'll figure it out, and then it'll help us solve climate change. Nobody's designing an AI to solve climate change. Like that's not what we're doing when you're training a bigger language model, right? So I think that there's the lessons of this movie about deciding what your purpose is and trying to build technology to augment humans, right? Like one of my favorite quotes that I read recently was from this randomly on the internet, author of Video Game Enthusiast, Joanna Massajuska, I believe. I'm not good at Polish last names, but I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do laundry and dishes. Right? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Right? What are we trying to accomplish with the technology we're inventing? And it's really fun to be Tony Stark in the lab and running your experiments and playing with all the cool tech and building your cars and telling your robots what to do, right? But he's not talking to other humans. He's not thinking about his impact on other humans. He doesn't really, at the beginning of this movie, he doesn't have much of a purpose with it other than to do the cool things. And so what he's doing is very large scale invisible harms out of his view screen, because he's letting other people make the hard decisions about purpose and deployment, right? And so we can't do that, right? As we are deploying, as you're building AI models in your company, as you're deciding what things you could potentially do with technology, we want to suggest that the magnanimous leader approach to that is make sure you understand what purpose is, not just to outcompete or to be more powerful than the other people, but like what change are you trying to affect in the world, and use it to amplify the power of thoughtful human decisions, of thoughtful human actions, and not to supplant it or let them off the hook and then like, oh well, it's not my fault, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry you didn't get hired, but like the AI said your resume wasn't very strong.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't offer you that medical help. I'm just a doctor, but the system tells me exactly what I have to do. It's all an automated workflow at this point.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, you're not, yeah, no, we don't cover that medicine for your exact combination of conditions and coverages. Or like, yeah, we're outsourcing a lot of decisions that are having real impact on humans. We Efficiency is maybe not the only goal for a lot of those things that we're doing.
That's good. Yeah, that's the trend. We kept bringing that one up, that the goal is to evaluate what value we are creating, not just what efficiency we are creating. And AI at this point is primarily an efficiency tool.
Mm-hmm.
And efficiency, like what we don't need more, like you said, from a art perspective, from a content perspective, the last thing we need is more content currently. That is not the problem that humans need to solve in today's day and age. Is we don't have enough content.
Exactly it. Exactly. There's I forget whatever 15,000 songs uploaded to Spotify every couple of minutes, right? Like that's we're drowning in content. We don't need more synthetically generated content. We need to figure out how to get through the stuff that we've got. That's really good. Yeah. So key takeaways from this episode. What do you got?
All right, we got to start with number one, that tech, or at least proper tech utilization, requires ownership. It means not just creating because it's cool, but considering the implications of what you will create and actually going out there and being a part of the test, like Tony is, where he experiences the impact, not just hears about it second and third hand. And it's so easy to write something off when you're hearing about it in very small doses, far away from you, and to convince yourself, oh, yeah, I'm the good guy. I'm Tony Stark, of course.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the human in the suit analogy is really powerful for that, right? Like if you're not there initiating the effects and watching what they do and taking some ownership of it and taking some risk on yourself, then you're not gonna have a good sense of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. So number two we talked about is the embracing loving conflict, that sometimes in order for us to grow, if we care for each other, we need to have conflict like there is between Potts and Tony. There was clearly some built up conflict that the two were experiencing. And finally, now that Tony is having a change in character, he's able to properly address that. I think Potts was probably willing to and capable with her character to address that long ago, but Tony was never opening himself up to be able to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Or he just walked away probably, or went and did another thing because that was his previous character, was to just keep doing cool things or things that bring him joy or pleasure. And now he's realizing, if I want to accomplish a mission, I have to actually have conflict with Rhodey, with Potts. Otherwise, I'm not going to grow. She's not going to grow, and we're not going to be able to accomplish this mission. And in the end, it pays off with the way that they're able to work together. And they come to the understanding that Tony as Iron Man is something that could work, and that Potts can continue to be the wise friend, wise business owner, business runner, and they can work well together.
Yeah, I love that one. Loving conflict. I think that's a takeaway we haven't phrased that way before, but I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really powerful one for the leadership being willing to face those. Yeah, and then I think the only thing is even just iterating on our first one about ownership, right? Is the assessing the costs, assessing the value versus the required input of the technology that we're developing. Are we making good decisions, not from an efficiency standpoint, but are we, is this the way that we're moving towards our purpose, the world that we're trying to create, the change that we're trying to initiate?
Yeah. And secondary and tertiary effects, we didn't talk about it before, but if it's a closed loop system or a fairly closed loop system, any change that I make to it has secondary and tertiary effects. Thus, introducing all of this technology into the world, while it may solve a first order problem, may create second and third order problems. How can I analyze that better so we don't keep reliving the same mistakes of the past?
Right. Yeah, and I think the answer to that, how can I analyze it better, is those first two things. You got to
Mm-hmm.
be the person in the suit, and you got to be willing to have the conversations. Right. Embrace the conflict. I love it. Concentric circles once again here at WonderTour. All right, I think that's it for this episode, and that brings to a close our series on humans and technology. We went through Interstellar, Ready Player One, Ford versus Ferrari, Oppenheimer, and bringing home with the Marvel classic, Iron Man. I think that's been really powerful for us to examine leadership challenges in the context of technology, which is such a recurring theme in our modern lives, and the role that a lot of us tend to be in. Right, innovation in the world a lot of times is technology based in a lot of our environments. So for our next series, we're starting something new. We're going to try a completely different angle on leadership. We're actually going to do a series on villains, and we're going to examine classic villains in Hollywood movie and other great stories, and look at where do they fall short of being great leaders. Some of the villains are really effective leaders up to a point. How does that compare with our magnanimous leader model, and what can we learn from not turning into the worst people in the universe that we love to root against in the movies. So we're looking forward to that, and we're going to start back in the Star Wars universe with the canonical movie villain. That's right, Darth Vader, coming up next, episode 111. So really looking forward to that. Thank you so much, Drew. This has been a great conversation today, and we hope you all enjoyed riding along with us, and you'll come back and join us again. Until then, just remember, as always, character is destiny.